Okay, I'm calling Platting to order at 6 o'clock. Members present: Bruce Truca, Doug Folk, James, me, and myself, chair. This is a special Platting Committee meeting. It was called by myself for the limited purpose of discussing proposed zoning reclassifications. Number 2, any public participation? If not, we'll proceed. What we are in need of is to have draft legislation for the zoning changes that we discussed for the area of 815 and 825 Whetstone Street, which is, I'm not going to read all the parcel ID numbers.
Come on, Rebecca.
Come on.
We need to teach Rebecca to read them like Todd did. 800.
As we discussed, you have it in front of you. It's to rezone that from urban neighborhood residential R3 to general industrial, and changing a limited industrial commercial to general industrial. And it's to change these, and also to change the fairgrounds, a portion of that, to special use from urban neighborhood residential R3 to special use. And we need the legislation brought forth so that we can have the public hearing. Without legislation, we can't have a public hearing.
I'll make the motion to request legislation to change the zoning classifications of the Whetstone Street properties. Second.
Okay.
Huh? Draft, oh, is it draft? Okay, let me make sure I specify draft legislation.
Yes. Okay. Are there any questions, discussions? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passed unanimously. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Do you, hang on first. Do you want to ask for public participation again real quick? It is on there,
Okay.
just in case.
As you heard, we made this motion for this. Is there any public participation?
Just for the platting.
Just for Platting. If not,
I move to adjourn.
okay. And Bruce seconded, and I'll adjourn at 6:03 p.m. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Go to your...
Going to the church now. Property care meeting at the church.
All right, I'm going to call the Special Health and Safety Committee meeting for Tuesday, September 14th, 2021 to order at 6:03 p.m. Members present are Mark McKeever, Bruce Truca, Jimmy, and myself, Chair. Number 1, the Special Health and Safety Committee meeting was called by the committee members for the limited purpose of discussing proposed property maintenance legislation. Before I get to public participation, I do want to say the law director is on his way up. He'll be here momentarily because I know we all have a lot of questions, and I want him here to answer them. And my intent tonight is to hear everything you have to say. And I would like to go through it page by page. If you have a question on page 1, let's go through page 1. If you see something that may refer to something else on another page, we can hop around. But I think systematically, if we go through page by page, and then you'll have all the time to ask every question you want. But for the time being, if there's any public participation, if there's anything anyone wants to address us on now, I'll open up the floor for that. Otherwise, we'll get into the nuts and bolts of it, just kind of read through it and ask the questions as we go. So does anybody wish to address the committee before we start?
Yes.
I'll ask for you to head to the podium, that way you're on recording, and state your name and address for me, Gary. Yeah, name and address.
Gary Harris, 1329 Nevada Winford Road, Bucyrus. In reading over this, one of the big issues I have goes back to what we have now. Everything in the ordinances still refers to occupant. When I was at one of the appeals meetings, I had them read the ordinance. And I asked Gordon Grove over there in that corner, who did you send the letter to? Well, they sent it to Gary Harris, my wife. What address did you send it to? Well, 1329 Nevada Road. Well, why didn't you send it to 507 West Mary? Well, you don't live there. I said, exactly. This says occupant, and it still does, whether it's an owner occupant or a rental occupant. And he keeps saying, well, there are two different meanings. Well, no, there isn't. Occupant means one thing, whoever lives there.
I'll tell you, when I used to teach college, my syllabus got longer every semester because we found things as we went along. I think this is going to be real similar. We're going to use experiences that each and every one of you and others may have had, and we're going to make sure we can address as much as we can in it. So
Okay.
our goal is not to rush this through at all. Our goal is
That's good.
to make it so that it's fair,
I appreciate
so that there's something that we can use to go after, whether it's a person who owns the property or a person who inhabits the property that's not doing anything at all
Right.
with the property. That's the goal. It's not to screw with the little guy per se. So trust me when I say we're going to go through this very methodically. We're going to answer every question, and we're going to make sure that when we are done with this, we have a product that is fair to everybody.
Well, the one thing I found with Gordon Grove, and I don't have anything against him, he's doing what he's told to do. But every time he gets cornered in a question, he said, well, I'm just doing what I'm told by Ratliff.
So
There's
that's,
no accountability for what they're doing.
so that's his way out.
I know it is. And that's not right.
I'm fully banking on a lot of back and forth throughout this process, so that we can make sure that we have everybody's questions answered, so that we're wording things fairly, and your input is not only appreciated, but it's requested. Go right ahead. Yes.
My name is Bill Stuckert. My address is 205 North Spring Street. I am also the chairman of the Property Maintenance Appeals Board for Bucyrus. The issue that Mr. Harris is speaking of, I do agree with what he's saying about the addressing of the violations should go to the person responsible. That would be the tenant, if they're the ones that caused the issue, or whoever the responsible person is. But we do follow the International Property Maintenance Code. That's this booklet here, as of the present. Now, I think some things are going to change with the new proposed system, but I would like to read to you here on the general requirements out of this code, where it says responsibility. The owner of the premises shall maintain the structures and exterior property in compliance with these requirements, except as otherwise provided for in this code. A person shall not occupy as owner occupant or permit another person to occupy premises which are not in a sanitary and safe condition and which do not comply with the requirements of this chapter. Okay. So this is basically saying that the end result is the property owner is the ultimate responsible person. That's all I have at this moment.
Thanks.
In response to that, I can't touch, or a landlord cannot touch somebody else's stuff,
That's
whether it's
right.
on their
I
property
understand
or
that.
in their house.
That's the
So
big
that's
dilemma we
a
have.
catch-22, or however
Yeah.
you want to call it.
I understand that. At that point, the recourse of the property owner is to process eviction of the tenant because they're not following what is required of them.
It's a damned if we do and damned if we don't.
I know, I understand, yes,
That's part of why we're here tonight.
that's right. Yeah.
All right.
And hopefully we can get some of this changed with this new proposed code. But this is just to answer Mr. Harris's question as to why the violation went to him and his wife instead of to the tenants.
And I think he and we understand that's why. It just doesn't make sense and we don't like it, I think is really what it boils down to. So, Rob, what I had shared with them was my intention was just to kind of run through this page by page. Let us and them ask questions and that way we can kind of work our way through it. Is there anything you wanted to say before we got rolling into it?
No.
Okay. I'm going to go through it page by page and section by section. Does everybody who's here have a copy of this to refer to? Okay. On the first page, section 100.01, any questions? 100.02, any questions? Go right ahead.
I'm sorry, back to 01, please.
Yeah.
I had a question on it says existing residential and I highlighted it so it's real dark. Is that commercial? It says non-residential. What's the word? Non-residential. Okay, non-residential, okay. What does that include?
Everything else,
Commercial, industrial?
everything else, residential and non-residential.
That's regardless if there's a structure on the property or not, correct?
And just for the sake of recording, John's asked if you have something at length to say, we'll ask you to go to the podium. If it's just a real quick blurb, I understand, not having you run it back and forth 100 times tonight, but if it's something substantial you have, he would prefer if you get up there so he can properly record you. So 100.1, that question was answered for you? Okay. 100.2, the intent. I've got a question. It says that existing structures and premises that do not comply with these provisions shall be altered or repaired to provide the minimum level of health and safety as required here. And my question is by who and at whose expense and what's the penalty if not?
I think you'll find that's answered later on.
That's what I was wondering,
Yeah.
As I read through it, I was really thinking of it each section one at a time and not hopping back and forth, but
Right.
I wanted to make sure that was answered.
Is there a length of time in there somewhere?
Yep. Section 105 is your enforcement.
Okay. So both of those two, Jim and Mike's questions, both are answered by section 105?
I believe so. I
Okay.
think you'll find that to be the case.
All right, we'll get down.
Can you read them for us, just so we can,
Section 105?
well, just who, just off the top of his head, like who? So the PMO or all inspectors, I guess?
Conducts the inspections, yes.
And then the requirements are this, the city, and this bill, and this piece of legislation, right?
Right. Was that? Yes.
Does it specifically say then the altering or repairing is done by the property owner?
Owner or operator, I believe, is how it's defined later in here.
Okay, I do remember seeing that phrase. Any other questions with the intent section 100.02? And just because you don't have questions now doesn't mean you can't come back and ask them later. 100.03 severability, any questions? 100.04 definitions. What's that? Occupant shall mean the person residing in or having use of the premises. The same person or persons can be an owner and occupant. So in that instance, if you're the landlord, I understand it to mean if you're the landlord, I'm your tenant, I'm the occupant, you are not. So,
That's been the whole issue with this whole thing.
well, and I think as we dive into this later on, we're going to see what the occupant is responsible for, what the owner is responsible for. I think here is just defining who those people are. All right. Any questions on page 1 and before we flip the page?
Yeah. E.
All right.
Let's go to E. Let's go to E.
Go ahead, Jim.
Property maintenance offer, PMO.
You're on 100.04E,
Yeah.
okay?
Shall be designated as an individual charged with enforcement of codes containing herein. The PMO shall be appointed by whoever, but PMO, let's talk about that. If we have a PMO working for the city and he designates a property that is electrically safe and that property burns down the next day, this city and the PMO is responsible
Why do you say that?
because he certified it okay. There's no problem with it electrically, but if it burns down the next day and it's an electrical issue that burns it down,
Is that your legal opinion?
then he and the city,
Is that your legal opinion?
is that your
No.
legal opinion?
No, absolutely not.
So he bears no responsibility whatsoever. Is that what you're saying?
No. I'm saying,
Okay, it's black and white. Either he does or he doesn't.
well, unfortunately, the law is not black and white.
Very correct.
I'll get to you in a second, Aaron. Let me let these two finish.
He has to bear some type of responsibility towards that house and the safety of that house.
No, he doesn't.
Then why inspect it?
Why even bother with this? This is worthless. If he doesn't bear any responsibility whatsoever, as far as plumbing, HVAC, or electrical,
So if your house gets robbed, the police are liable because they didn't prevent the robbery?
well, that depends. Did the PMO inspect it for safety? Excuse me. Right. If the police say that you can't rob it, then yeah, the police would be.
Aaron?
Okay, hypothetical. You just bought an apartment, you go through, everything looks good. Did you tear out every wall to see whether or not any of those wires were torn apart by mice? Would you want that person to tear into your walls to see
Aaron,
if those?
every house that I've went through has had all receptacles, all light switches, all the wiring has been replaced.
So,
Every one of them.
The property
But
maintenance
So I'll
officer,
guarantee that
I
house.
replaced wiring in my garage and had mice chew through it. You can't see what's inside the wall. So he went through and inspected, everything looked good, didn't see any shorts. But that mouse bit through that night. What happens then?
the property maintenance
That's the
officer,
mouse's fault. You sue the dead mouse?
Hey, guys, we're gonna, one at a time. Mr. Ratliff has the floor.
the property maintenance officer
See-
is not certifying that the house is not going to burn down. The property maintenance officer is not certifying that the house does not have electrical issues. The property maintenance officer is simply saying that the house, per his inspection, meets the standards and codes of that the city has levied. That's all. That's all he's doing. We're setting,
So are
we
you,
have certain
are the
standards.
codes saying that all outlets are grounded?
The codes, the current property maintenance code does say that, yes.
Because about, I'd say, a third of the houses in Bucyrus aren't properly wired.
And that's why,
And he can shut down a third of the houses.
and that's why we're talking about whether or not getting away from the International Property Maintenance Code is an appropriate thing to do. Because as we've discussed multiple times in the past, there are numerous requirements in the property maintenance code that most houses in the city would not pass based on the standards of the International Property Maintenance Code. So you could just as easily say that my house burnt down, or as a tenant, my house burned down, and the reason it burnt down is because the city property maintenance inspector did not come in here and enforce all these codes that are in the IPMC that the city has adopted.
Well, a house
Just as
burned down
easily
in
say that.
Crestline, and that's, that's not the
They use the
PMO's fault. I guarantee if a house burned down in Crestline and the PMO did not go through that house and it was electrical, I agree. We bear no responsibility.
Well, Crestline uses the IPMC as well, different version of it, but they use the IPMC for their property code as well.
Whether it's Crestline or not is irrelevant. I mean,
Then why don't you say it?
it could be Gallion, it could be Mansfield,
Right.
Marion.
And the argument is the same. You have a code that says these are the standards, and we all admit we are not enforcing those standards. Buried within that IPMC are numerous things. Grounded outlets, all the windows have to open, firewalls. It's 40-some pages of all kinds of requirements. We don't enforce all those. We couldn't. Most of our housing
But you're
stock,
saying the
even our newest
PMO
houses.
The PMO must enforce these. That's just what he's doing.
What we're saying is this is a much condensed version of that does not have as many things in it as the IPMC. And we're
Okay.
trying to get away from all those standards that are in the IPMC.
The IMPC doesn't work, correct? Would you agree?
No, I think the IPMC works incredibly well if it's enforced, and if there is a will amongst the people to enforce it. There is not a will amongst the people to enforce the IPMC.
Is that's part of the issue, that maybe landlords don't want to enforce it, as another part of it that we don't have the manpower to enforce it?
I think it's both. We don't want to enforce, we don't have the manpower to enforce it, and two, I don't believe as a legislative body, this entity wants to enforce that standard on our housing stock across the board. And it's the same, and we run into that every time with the IPMC. If we cite somebody for their porch falling off, the first words out of their mouth is, well, something else doesn't work, and why aren't you enforcing that? And so what I would advocate for is a much condensed version. Let's set what are some community standards. We think these things are our community standards. These things, whatever they are, it doesn't have to be what's in his. These things are what we say should be the bare minimum of the conditions of housing within our community. And we as a people agree that this should be the bare minimum, and we should enforce those as such. The fact that it may not cover the depths of the electrical system or the depths of the sewer system of a property, or the fact that something may still happen to the property that is a cataclysmic event, does not create liability. It's simply saying that we have a set of minimum standards, and we're going to enforce this set of minimum standards amongst our housing stock so that we can quit letting things sit abandoned and vacant for decades, so we can quit watching our housing stock rot around us, so we can quit tearing down housing so that our school district is marginally smaller monthly. That's we as a people, the three members of this committee who are all landlords, have to make a decision whether we as a people are going to set standards for our community. We as a people are going to say children should not live in this type of condition.
So the standard is, as long as there's an outlet there, it doesn't have to be wired properly. As long as there's not wires hanging out, as long as there's a receptacle there, it's okay.
The standard is whatever this committee determines to put in their ordinance. Right now, the standard that this committee, in the previous version of this committee, has put into play is the standard that is in the IPMC. What I'm coming to you telling you is that as the prosecutor, as the person that oversees that property maintenance officer, there is no will in this body or in the courts to enforce those codes as written in the IPMC. So our choices are, let it be the Wild West and people just fend for themselves and good luck. Or let's have some standards that we can enforce and we can agree to enforce. Or,
I guess I'm trying to get more specific on what's.
And that's your job, to put that in here.
And I think
what,
if there's something,
what specific thing you
if there's something
believe.
that you're intent on wanting to see in there, we can discuss it. I think that's what part of why we're doing this. So in the instance of the electricity, if you'd like to see it more broadly defined, let's discuss it when we get into that section of it.
I make no pretense about being able to fix anything or know what those standards should be. I make no pretense of that.
But
I've adopted codes from other cities, and we've tried to make something that is basic and can apply across the board.
Let's back up. I'm just questioning the PMO.
Mhm.
What certifications do they have to have?
Set those.
I'm
Put it down right
I'm thinking
now.
around town, we're looking at electrical, we have plumbing, everybody has to be certified, HVAC. All those can kill people in their homes.
I don't dispute it.
So now-
set those standards and then fund the office.
Now we're looking at, I'm thinking about the only business that can do that in town is maybe one or two.
Mhm.
And that's maybe Ken Brothers. But, they're the only guys that's qualified in all three of those, maybe.
Set your standards and hire the person that can enforce it.
Aaron?
I was gonna say, it sounds more like you're more interested in do we have any place else in here that would talk about the PMO? It says appointed by, but it doesn't say what they have to have under their
Right.
name to show whether or not they know what they're talking about even.
That's the whole purpose of.
Just because I owned a house once doesn't mean I can inspect one.
You don't want me inspecting.
Well, it's gonna be a delicate balance between how many letters do you want after their name and what do we have to fund to pay them? And at some point, if you want them to be certified in everything, we can afford that. You know, but we're gonna have to get, hold on, Bill, I got
But
you.
But
when
when you buy a house, you have a house inspection, and the person that comes in and inspects your house is not certified. He's certified as or she is certified as a home inspector, not as an electrician and a.
They hold some liability.
Yeah.
Factor.
Joe?
You know, you take, as a contractor dealing in the Richland County area, you know, there is we really, I mean, and as a multi-unit landlord in this area, we gotta watch how big of a can of worms you feel like opening up. Because, as Mr. Me said, how far are we gonna go with this? You know, to where, and I know Richland County has lost inspectors because they haven't been able to keep their certifications. Well, structurally, electrically, Richland County Health Department has lost them on a plumbing aspect because over there, it's inspected regardless whether it's an alteration or a new build. It is supposed to be to code regardless. The only time you need to be certified is on a commercial aspect. So residential, it has to be to code, you don't have to be certified. How far are we gonna go? And we get into where this PMO has a massive amount of power. And when you're getting into construction from a residential and a non-residential perspective, it's a vast area that we're talking about covering here. And so are we doing this for the abandoned buildings that are run down, like the Warren Street situation that we had that took months to board up 8 windows and a door? Because we're arguing over, does the city control the property or does the guy that we can't track down control the property? Who's paying for the 8 pieces of plywood? Or are we doing this for a, you know, community? I keep hearing, so our children are safe, community standard, this and that. I mean, how far are we going? Because as a landlord, we can only do so much. We only have so much. Our tenants have a lot of power. And when we have administrations that are putting eviction moratoriums on and everything else like this, depending on how you rent and who you're renting to, what do we do? That's my question. How far are we going and how big of a can of worms are we opening up? Because some of this stuff, when we're talking leaky foundations, any foundation that takes in moisture, I mean, how many sandstone foundation houses do we have in this? They were made to take in moisture.
Yeah.
A lot of them have internal cisterns.
Yep.
90% of them probably.
So, I mean, are we talking the homeowner has to jack the foundation up and redo the foundation? I mean, you're talking a bigger expense than the house is worth. So where are we going?
So Joe, can I ask you, just
Yep.
as a builder and as a landlord, when we're comparing the International Property Maintenance Code to trying to do something else, where's your favor and where do you see us doing the best good for everybody?
A community, I see a rundown structure issue. Are we going around picking on people whose paint's just peeling on their house, or are we talking houses that have burnt that, you know, maybe the property owner bought it cheap and he's in prison, like the Warren Street issue? Are we talking about that are straight community safety hazards to where I'm buying the house next door and I'm doing work over there and I'm finding needles in the driveway and the city doesn't want to board the property up? Are we talking that, or are we talking picking on Mr. Harris and we're arguing over who's the owner, who's the occupant, and trying to clean it up when he's trying to do what he can? I mean, we got to pick our battles.
And that's what I think our intention is to try to go through this. And I have notes on that page about the leaky foundation. Yeah, you know, there's certain things that I think we need to look at, and that's why we're having this back and forth.
You know, the gutter, every structure on a property needs to have gutter and downspouts.
Right.
Are we talking a guy's 6x6 shed in the backyard, he's got to have gutter and downspouts? When it's 4 feet from the property line, and according to building code, you can't have a downspout that discharges within 5 feet of a property line.
Yeah, and that's where I think getting through page by page, we'll be able to make those notations and adjustments. Bill?
As a retired industrial electrical maintenance technician, I can tell you that it's almost impossible to assure that there are no issues with an electrical system. Correct. Regardless if you're certified or not. And I know that that same situation will exist with pretty much all contractors, plumbers, so forth. Okay? So as far as having a PMO that's certified, as an industrial electrical technician, I was not certified as such. I wasn't required to be. All that was required was that my manager said that I was capable of doing the job.
Different situation when you work for a company versus city.
Yeah.
It's public.
I know you take the state of Ohio, home inspector wise, they're now certified by the state. I mean, you're doing your national testing, you're going through all that, so.
And they're licensed, they're insured and bonded.
They're insured and bonded by
Yeah.
the, you know, the state of Ohio is assuring all that stuff now. I mean, it's all changed in the last 2 years.
Yeah. Charlie, or Bob, sorry.
To go along with what he was saying, well, the way I see this legislation is built and the way we've done the zoning or the property maintenance issues that have been handled, it's all been reported by somebody else and a resident of the city, right? So the only buildings that are going to be reported, it's not going to be somebody that, they're not going to report their own house.
Right.
Or their own residence. So.
A tenant may if they are fed up with their landlord and have.
This is what I'm going to.
That's where
This
it's
is
going.
this is what I'm going to.
I gotcha.
That's why.
So, for everybody to be on an equal footing, the only way you could do that is to have forced inspections, you know, of the entire city, of all the properties of the city.
Yeah.
Because the only way somebody's going to know what's going on in my building is a resident's going to have to report me. And it's usually going to be one that's ticked off because they're 2 months behind and I'm telling them they need to get
Can I
out.
bounce a thought off of you? Just thinking out loud, seeing where this idea goes. What about if it's only at the time of a sale or a time of a new water connection, which would translate into maybe a new tenant moving? I know not all the tenants pay their water bill, but something that triggers.
I don't know. To me, personally, I don't think the government should be inspecting any of it. And it should be the Wild West, like what Ratliff said, because everybody's, you know, able to make their own decisions. That's what I feel. But,
A lot of buyers will get their own inspectors.
I mean, if you're smart enough, you should be able to do it. I mean, you should get a home inspection. If you're not qualified to inspect it yourself, or feel that you're confident enough to inspect it yourself, you should get somebody else to look at it for you.
Yeah.
But,
Unfortunately, it doesn't happen.
it doesn't happen. I understand it doesn't happen. I know we live in a city, so stuff affects everybody else, property values, you know, we're all in the same boat. But what are we trying to accomplish with this? Are we trying to get vacant buildings? Are we trying to get, you know, slumlords? I mean, what are we trying to accomplish? Because maybe we need to have a totally different legislation that's, you know, if your house sits vacant for so many months, maybe that should be the problem.
I've got notes on that.
I mean-
What triggers it to be called vacant?
On top of what we already have, maybe we shouldn't put this, maybe it should just be vacancies. Because you put this and none of these things are clearly defined in here at all.
Right.
So I don't know how we can make a property code that has a lot of gray area to it, because we're talking about clearly defined things of right or wrong.
Well, I think that's part of the job of this committee is to maybe if you see something that's not clearly defined, which I have plenty of notes here.
Well, I know,
That
but
we
the thing
need
is,
to
so.
maybe look at making it clearly
Yeah,
defined.
the only thing I see is the responsibility of who's reported. So if you're not going to report your own building, then it's not going to take any of the residencies that are owner occupied. Nope, that takes them out. So what % of the city is owner occupied? So you might as well just take that out, and it's not going to affect them. So then what's left over is what either public sees on the inside or a rental building. And that's all you're going to get with this piece of legislation. And that's pretty much probably what you already get anyways.
Joe?
And if there are tenant issues and they're not paying, I mean, if they have a problem on the inside, according to Ohio landlord-tenant law, I mean, they take it up to the court. They still got to pay their rent up to the courthouse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's up to the court to decide what the problem is fixed or not.
Yeah.
Most people don't take that recourse,
Yeah.
most people don't use it, but it's there on the
They do
landlord
have a
side at the
recourse.
same time.
Yeah.
There is a recourse.
Ken?
His comment is correct, that's the way it's supposed to be done, but what happens, the tenant would call the city has an ear for that, and then all of a sudden, they're out there on your doorstep.
Right.
And that tenant's gonna let that person in, and I'm not saying to hide something, but if you went into 100 homes in Bucyrus, owner occupied or rental, you're gonna find 95 violations.
I agree. You probably find violations in every one of our houses.
Yeah, exactly.
So-
But what the city should do is when they get that call from that tenant, the sanitarian 25 years ago had a policy, the first thing he'd ask, is your rent paid? And they can obviously say no, and he'd say, get that straight, then you call me back.
And I'm not opposed to saying if a complaint's called in, that if somebody wants to come and walk through it to inspect it, the owner should be present as well, I believe.
Oh, I'm in.
Absolutely.
Aaron?
To add to that,
Sorry,
I
Rebecca.
think that they should go ahead and also approve where they've tried to contact their landlord.
And this is all stuff we can
Because
go
a lot of them will say, I called him, I told him this was leaking, but there's never been actual contact. And then you can see where they took apart the pipe that is now leaking,
Yeah.
or because they were mad at him. But then
Or they
again,
don't want to contact you because they owe you money, so.
But you guys are wrong about the private residences, they get turned in by the neighbors.
Well,
Hold on, guys, one at a time. Rebecca?
Devil's advocate, because I know there's a lot of landlords in here right now. What about the tenants? Is there stuff in here for the tenants? Because there are places in town that they have contacted landlords, and they've gone to the courthouse, and they've called the city, and things still have not been fixed.
Oh, that's not true.
Yeah, it is.
The high revised code right here, it says, I got it 5321-04. You know, you're supposed to maintain your property that you own in good, safe, and working order, and all, you know, the conditions, safe, operable conditions. I mean, the state of Ohio says that. And they can sue me if they want to.
It's a process no different than this is gonna be on the landlord end or owner end. I mean, there's a process that the tenant has to go through, just no different than if they have a complaint, no different than a landlord or a homeowner. If a complaint is filed against them, we have to have a certain amount of time that we have to fix the problem and appeals and everything else. I mean, it's, every tenant wants something fixed right now. Like tomorrow, no different than any customer and what I do.
Right.
They want it all right now. But there's a process involved at the same time, and it has to be looked at, there has to be time given, and the Ohio Revised Code is very strong on the tenant, and, you know, there are a lot of rights for a tenant, no different than in the city, concerning utilities and everything else like that. I just can't go shut my tenant's utilities off because they didn't pay their rent.
Right.
I'm gonna be in deep doo-doo if that happens, you know.
You'd be amazed how many calls the city takes from landlords requesting exactly that.
No, I ran into a situation personally with the property I just bought to where the landlord that owned the place before I took possession shut the water off, and the tenant just called down here and turned the water on, and next thing you know, I got a water bill in my name and I don't take possession for another 10 days. And I'm like, what's going on? Well, county auditor has it as I own the property even though I legally don't own the property yet, and now I'm paying a water bill. And so, you know, I don't have any rights in that situation. I'm paying their water bill regardless. And so, you know.
Well, you have to, no matter what.
I have to. That's money out of my pocket that I legally don't even own the property yet. And so, I mean, where's my recourse for that? You know?
Well, in that situation, the county auditor recorded that you did own the property. And so your recourse would be where that mistake was made.
Again, it's a process, and taking that up with the utility department, I'm still getting paid the water bill. I still gotta pay it. It's what believe me, I brought all of it's, again, everything's a process.
Yeah.
So, I'm just, the main point here I think is, what's the whole purpose of this? Is it an abandoned building purpose of why we're doing this, or is it because there has to be a line drawn somewhere when it comes to a PMO and inspections and the power, because that person, whoever it is gonna have a lot of power to determine, we're in front of the Board of Appeals or whatever we're doing, and then what recourse do I have? Is it the appeal board? Are they gonna go out and look at the property at the same time? I mean, what's the recourse gonna be and how far are we going? Interior, whether it's plumbing, whether it's electrical, no matter what it may be, HVAC, I mean.
And I think any one of us in the room, up here or out there, might answer that question differently. I think each of us has, our mindset. I'm gonna tell you what mine is, and that's that I want anybody who's going to go and rent a property to have access to a safe property. That there's functioning heat, that doesn't have a cracked heat exchanger and spewing toxic gases into their home, that has running water without, it dripping everywhere and mold and yada, yada, yada. I want people to have the access to a safe place to live. That's my reason that I would like to see us do something rather than nothing. So.
That's the same thing we offer.
Correct, but not every landlord does
I understand.
that, and I think that's where,
There's about 3 that don't. I know who they are.
Bruce.
Right now, it's already on the books that, Columbia Gas, they tell you, hey, I'm coming, and there ain't no ifs, ands, or buts. They're gonna come through the house and check everything. If they don't, they'll just turn the gas off for you.
And they've done that multiple times.
So, that's already a process that's already.
But we've seen people living in houses that don't have a working furnace, that they might be using a kerosene heater or a space heater, and that's all that they've been provided. And to me, that's not adequate. Is that our job? I don't know. I guess that's why we're here having this conversation.
Well, according to that though, I think that's a requirement that the tenant doesn't necessarily have to pay rent money if he doesn't have heat or water. He could stop and he could win that battle, so hence why we would want to keep the heat and the water going, because we won't be getting our money, and if we don't get our money, we're not running a business.
Right. Aaron?
You said for renters, but it's really, this is a community. You can't have your kids playing on the sidewalk and have the siding falling off the house next door and making it an unsafe environment. It doesn't matter if it's a rental or a
You're correct.
personal home.
You're correct.
Or a business. Like, look at what happened to the theater and all the other houses in this town that were owned by that same individual. I mean, there were holes in a roof that you couldn't see from the street, but the neighbors next door had raccoons coming out of the holes in that roof next door into their kids' bedrooms. That's unsafe. That's one of the things for the reason for property maintenance.
Joe?
I guess my question would be then, when it comes down to city-owned properties, what's the recourse against the city? Because the city's been in no hurry sometimes to solve some of these problems that we've had on some of these other houses. Whether it's emails going to them, or it's phone calls, or it's in-person conversations.
You're saying property's owned by the city?
Yeah, here's from a legal aspect, if the city can't find, if they're not getting a hold of the landlord, say he's locked up or whatever else, and there's no way for him to maintain the property. When it comes down to the legality of it, the city of Mansfield has had to take care of it numerous times to where the city's responsible for boarding up the property or whatever else like that from a health and safety factor. The Warren Street house is no different, that just got boarded up last week. It sat that way for months with complaint after complaint after complaint, and we're gonna get this taken care of, and it still sat there. The grass is 6 foot tall, the front porch is fallen. I mean, if there's someone that is abusing drugs in that house and ODs and the ambulance comes on the front porch, who's responsible when the paramedic, gets injured, and are they suing the city at the same time? I mean, what's the recourse against the city?
Those are not city-owned buildings. They simply aren't. And part of what we have proposed in this is something to combat that, a vacant and abandoned building ordinance that would require structures. There are structures in this town that are vacant and been sitting empty since I was in high school.
I'm not disagreeing with that. I guess
I
get upset with the fact that when I get a letter in my mailbox complaining about weeds on the sidewalk when I don't have any weeds, or around my lamppost when I don't even have a lamppost on my property. When I go down to the art park or I see City Hall, or I see all this other stuff where there's leak, someone wants to file a complaint on me when I don't even have that existing on my property, when the city has the same thing going on.
I agree wholeheartedly. We got to keep our own
That's
house in
my
order
problem.
before we look at somebody else's. Wholeheartedly agree with that. Rebecca?
Is there anything in here or willing to put in here similar to what we do with the mowing of properties? So like if you have an owner that you can't get a hold of, and there's no way to track them down because they're out of state or they're in jail or whichever, that if the city takes over the responsibility of boarding it up or cleaning it up, that they charge that to the property?
I think that's in here already. I saw that about boarding up was in here.
It is, it's in here, and there are requirements to it, and there's expenses to it. Somebody's got to pay for that. And right now, as taxpayers, you're paying for that. And one of the goals of some of the legislation in here is to shift that burden from all of us as taxpayers to the banks and the people that are holding on to these abandoned properties.
I said, Rob, didn't you say that part of the reason we were doing this was to shift it so we could get the properties before they had to be torn down?
Yeah, I mean, that's a...
Is that part of the reason for this? I mean, that way, if you know that there's a structure that's an issue, but as part of this, I mean, I know we haven't gotten to go through it all.
No, and that's one of the issues with the abandoned building and the registration process and the fees that are made part of there. You guys have all seen it. You can find dozens of properties right now on the county auditor's website, $25,000, $30,000 in back taxes. Still haven't been foreclosed upon. It's not uncommon. The person you referenced earlier used to let it build up to $25,000 and pay it off just to stall the foreclosure, just to tease us. So we can't speed up the county. The county does that. They have one guy that, that's not even his main job. So we can't speed that up. We can't get involved in the tax foreclosure process. But when we have fines and penalties for abandoned buildings, for the out-of-state banks, for the guys that are in jail, for the one over on, what's his name, it's 4 or 5 different LLCs, and he bankrupt on all of them. The Clark Station, that was 5 different LLCs all out of Detroit that was stacked on top of each other. In those situations, then the city could assess fines and penalties, then the city could foreclose based upon those fines and penalties and bypass the county and not even worry about the county and how many years they may be waiting on a tax foreclosure. The other problem with the county tax foreclosure process is, and this happens all the time, the county will be owed $5,000, $8,000 on a tax foreclosure, and then they'll sell it to a company called Taxis. We have a number of properties in town right now that are owned, and you can look at it, and there's a variety of different nomenclature they use, but usually it's REO, Real Estate, Ohio, LLC, Taxis. Most of the time it's based out of Puerto Rico or sometimes Dallas. So the county will sell it to that company. That company never records it as they own it. They'll leave it in whoever's name got foreclosed upon. Somebody could be dead, could be whatever. They'll leave it in that person's name, never register it under their name, but they've paid it, they've taken ownership of it, and we can't do anything because it's some out-of-state company. I have, I think, six or eight of these over at the courthouse right now that are being held in contempt of court at a $1,000 a day fine. But they don't care. So there's no response, and there's nothing we can do on those. The Warren Street, I'd love to go tear it down. It's going to cost about $10,000 to $12,000 to tear that house down. But I've also got the one on Whetstone by the tracks that needs to be torn down. I got the one on Blicky Street that needs to be torn down. I've got about a dozen others that need to be torn down. The one on Blicky Street's the only one that we owe. So again, if I tear down that one on Warren Street next year, if we put that one in our budget, which will probably be the one on Whetstone and the one on Warren Street, that's $25,000 probably between the two of them with the asbestos inspection and everything else we got to do. It puts the buildings behind Kroger 1 year further back. We keep setting those back. And that's $25,000 that as taxpayers is coming out of your pocket, coming out of my pocket, all your pockets. Because we're paying for it as taxpayers. What I'm saying, what this is trying to do is shift the burden. Shift the burden to the banks, to the REO investment trust, to the out-of-state land speculators, to the BlackRocks of the world, whoever it is that's sitting on these properties and leaving them in that condition. The house down here in the 800 block of South Sandusky, beautiful big old house, but it's been vacant the entire time I've been here because nobody wants to do anything with it. We've prosecuted, they don't open the trust, and we don't have any tools. The county hasn't foreclosed upon it, and we have no tools to go in and say, stop, we're taking this house, we're gonna transfer it, we're gonna put it out for auction, we're gonna put it out to bid, somebody like Jim or Joe or whoever that wants to rehab it and make profit and sell it. I don't care. From my perspective as city attorney, I want butts in seats. I want heads in beds, and those are people that are going to go to school and pay taxes, make our water bills cheaper because we spread the burden around, and that's all we're trying to do. None of this is a personal attack on any of you as landlords. I think we should have. I personally believe that as a community, if we're not willing to say that there's a minimum standard that we believe children should live in, that's despicable on me, but that's different. The goal of this is simply to say, we don't have the tax income. We don't have unlimited money to be tearing down houses. We've got to generate revenue somehow. We've got to generate it from the people that are offenders, the ones with the vacant buildings, the abandoned buildings, those type of people. So that's one of the main goals here. And Joe, you're asking like, what's the main goal? What's the goal here? That's it. Give me the tools that I can go to the courthouse and say, that's a nuisance. I'm going to shut it down, and I'm going to go bulldoze it, and I'm going to assess it. And that's the process. Now there is a process in the ORC for doing that, and that's something that's being worked on behind the scenes. You guys haven't been at some of those meetings, and my departure has complicated it. I apologize for that, but we have kind of a tentative agreement with a company out of Columbus or Dublin that will work with us on the nuisance properties. I can go to the courthouse and I can declare a property a nuisance property and go through a hearing and prevail there, and the court will say, okay, it's a nuisance property, now it's on you to do something with it. I don't have money, I don't have the tools, I don't have anything, I don't have that solution. So we found a company in Columbus that's what they do. They come in, they'll be appointed as a receiver, and they would rehab it or take it and sell it or whatever they need to do to get it back in the active market. So that's something that's going on in the background with respect to some of those nuisance properties, those vacant properties, so we can again try to get those sooner.
So let's back up a little bit. Beyond this, what you're saying is our relationship with the county is so bad that they continue to sell these properties to taxis and other places, and they know it's a hindrance to us as a city. They know it devaluates the county and the city that they live in, but they continue to do it.
We have competing interests. I'm not saying that our relationship is bad with the county. I'm saying that we have two different sets of interests. The county has it, and if you look at property tax on your property and you break down where that goes to, very little of it comes to the city, practically none. Most of that goes to other sources. So
I understand that.
So the county can sell it to taxis or whatever, and they say, hey, we got paid. That's all we wanted. We got our back taxes, and they own it, and they're going to be paying the taxes, and we don't care.
But these people that live in Crawford County and Bucyrus, Ohio, and surrounding towns, you're telling me that they don't care, they just continually sell these properties to taxis?
I'm not telling you that they don't care, I'm telling you that they continue to sell the properties to taxis.
Well, I'm telling you, if they continue to sell them to taxis and other people like that, then they don't care.
Well, I'm not going to read motive into it. What I'm going to tell you is their job is to generate tax revenue for the county. Yeah, their job is to generate revenue, and they can generate revenue by selling to taxis, and that's the end of discussion as far as they're concerned.
They've done their job.
Yeah, exactly.
Joe?
So, does it make sense to tackle a standalone potential piece of legislation or section of the code that just is taking care of the vacant or abandoned properties, knowing that it's something that can be done a lot faster than going through all?
You would think that,
We
but
actually
tried that, and
tried it in a
we
number of
got a
years.
lot of pushback from landlords, and at that time, we were trying to say, look, we're not coming after you. We're trying to come after, and as a landlord, if you bought a house, or you've owned this house for 10 years, you got a tenant that does a little bit of damage, they're moving out. Let's say you schedule 3 months worth of time that you're gonna work on this. Is that house vacant during that time? I don't think so.
It's a matter of what you guys determine the definition of vacant or
Yeah,
abandoned
an
is.
insurance company's gonna say 30 days without habitation, it's vacant. To me, if you're in there working on it every day or a couple days a week, it's not vacant. It's when you've walked away from it. And I think we have to find a way to
Right, and
I guess that's what I'm asking,
what
because there
defines
are ways to get around as a landlord, I got a couple places sitting in, I send guys in there like once a week to do some work on it.
Mhm.
But is that property vacant? No. But it doesn't matter what my definition of vacant is, it matters what your guys' definition of vacant or abandoned is.
And what if you bought a building and your sole purpose of that building is to store stuff in there?
Right.
Is that vacant? So I think we just need to determine that, and that's where really what we were trying to do several years ago, and we got so much pushback on it,
So
we
I
kind
guess
of
it's
dropped
a
it.
PR problem from the city end of what is trying to happen involving the legislation.
Yeah, but in response to kind of what you're saying, Joe, is definition of vacant is key to all that. But you, as an owner or a builder or whatever your role would be, you would conform your activities a little bit if you had a concrete definition of vacant. Instead of letting something sit where you only worked on it maybe a couple days a month for 2 years, maybe you work on it more than a couple days a month to get it done in a year or something like that. If there was a concrete definition, you would adjust your business practices accordingly, to maybe focus on something a little bit more or something like that. And clearly there's two big distinctions between vacant and temporarily vacant or permanently vacant and abandoned.
Correct.
The prime example is Ponderosa. Is that vacant or is it abandoned?
Yes.
Yeah,
There's people living there.
But
Nice.
that's a prime building to consider that.
Right.
I mean, we all know the owner. He'll tell you he's actively marketing it, and has been for a couple decades. So, so is that vacant or abandoned? And the wordsmithing of defining which that is difficult. The old swan, vacant or abandoned?
So, and again, we run into the whole legal, my legal definition and your legal definition when it comes down to the core law and arguing before judges and everything else like that. But does it make sense to define in some of those definitions, of securing the property and making sure the exterior isn't a nuisance, a quote-unquote nuisance to where, the soffit's falling off like the house over on Lucas or whatever it is, to where, you got a whole soffit board that was laying, 16 feet long down on the ground, and, there's animals, and you can just see the trail going up. What is where it's sitting empty?
Yeah.
But, is there a way to speed that part of the process up?
I believe so. I believe so in that
And
vacant.
define what is a secure and safe property if it is in the temporarily vacant stage or whatever stage that it may be in along the way to where it's still.
Yeah.
Well, and I think vacant and not, not being secure, vacant and having something in
If
disrepair.
I buy a property and I know I'm not gonna get to it for 5 months, and there's no one living in it.
Right.
you
But if you're taking the time and the concern to make sure that it's properly secured, nothing is falling off of it, those types of things, I don't have an issue with that.
But I think that's gonna, it's, like Robin said, it's gonna have to be defined at some point, because those definitions and where we're at now determine how fast I move on things.
Well, yeah, and a lot of that can be handled through a registration process. It's common to come up here and get a building permit. I don't know how much they are, $5. You come up and you get we would have fees for abandoned. We would have fees for, long-term vacant. maybe you come up and you get a vacancy permit that, hey, I'm gonna hold on to this for 6 months or whatever, and it's a, $5, permit that just says, we know who you are, you know who we are, you're gonna be doing certain things. Because a lot of the problem with some of those is you don't know who the owner is, or the owner disappears. And when there's no one to get in contact, police go by and the back door's been busted open, or it hasn't been mowed in 3 months, and there's nobody to get in contact with. That's where it goes from vacant to abandoned. But if it's registered, if there's, hey, I got this permit because I'm not going to do anything for 6 months, and here's how to get in touch with me, and I certify that the doors are locked and the.
I think if we're going to do that, there has to be a proof of insurance on the property thing at the same time, because, Kevin knows from an insurance perspective, it costs me a lot more to insure a place when it's sitting empty
It does.
than it does if someone's in it. And if there is no insurance on a place, which we've dealt with before,
And I don't necessarily think you have to insure every structure you own. I think you need to have liability insurance for sure.
Correct.
But in the state of Ohio, it's illegal for me as a landlord to require my tenant in a residential structure to have renter's insurance per se. I don't know how that would pan out if the city would try to force insurance on there. I don't know if we've got the legal right to do that. I'm going to think not. But on a commercial structure, it's a whole different thing. If I own a commercial structure, I can require my commercial tenant to hold, insurance. Mark?
The other thing we have that we've dealt with is the incident of the old Eckleberry. We had the fire department had no knowledge of anybody living in the upstairs. No knowledge. The whole place was up in smoke. Luckily, somebody said something, and they were able to get a dog out of there before it would have been. Let alone, who knows if somebody would have been in there. If we get these buildings that are vacant, and I'm not saying being worked on, vacant buildings, so that we hold the property owner responsible, so that we know that it is secured and that there's no people in there, that if it does catch on fire, they're still going to look for people to make sure, but we have better knowledge that the likelihood isn't there. Like I said, I live on Poplar, and I saw the whole fire, and luckily somebody did say, hey, and they went up there and got it, but nobody had knowledge. The city had no knowledge, the fire department, the police department had no knowledge of anybody living there.
Aaron?
Roger Overlander,
Hold on. Aaron?
I was gonna say, as part of this, I'm hearing a lot of valid points, I'm seeing a lot of stuff that like the weeds, it goes straight to owner. I would think the occupant would be first and then the owner. But like he was saying, he buys a building, he's not gonna be able to get to it for 5 months. So couldn't we just have it as part of this, that, if I buy someplace, I give you notice that it's going to be sitting empty for 5 months, I will be in there, here's how to contact me, plus that way if the police and the fire can put it in their system, this place is empty. And we could always ask that they make sure, owning that while it's sitting empty, that there's definitely liability insurance on there in case something were to happen.
Well, and the way you do that insurance thing is, you may have a fee that, you may have a registration fee that's $5 if it's insured, if maybe it's a higher fee if you don't have proof of insurance. I mean, there's ways to nudge people in that direction. But and the problem is dissipated a little bit, at the height of the foreclosure crisis, and when I first got here, we were on the tail end of that. But, when the banks foreclose, and part of that vacant and abandoned building ordinance is that foreclosure notice. When they foreclose, they've got to register. They've got to take certain steps. And I probably get a call a couple times a week from banks that are foreclosing somewhere and want to know what our registration fee is for the vacant building, because they expect it now. It's just common everywhere. There was a couple houses that first couple years I was here on Kaler and Poplar that the people that owned it were thrown out because of the foreclosure. You don't technically have to leave when the bank forecloses, especially if they don't record it in their name. There's some loopholes there. But, the people otherwise would have still been in that house taking care of it, but for the fact that the bank forced them out, and, then the bank just let it sit there and rot, and it had to be torn down.
Bill?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment about Mark's reference to the Uppenberry fire there. The city didn't, the fire department didn't know that there was somebody living in the building. And really, that doesn't matter if they know there is supposed to be somebody living there or not. Any building, and you did make reference to this, Mark, that any building, a fire or whatever disaster, needs to be approached with the attitude that there could be somebody in there. So it really doesn't make sense to have a record of what buildings are supposed to be occupied or not, because you never know if it could have been some vagrant going into the building, setting a fire, could be trapped in there.
Right, I'm saying, but that gives them, at least they know there's nobody permanently living in there, but they're still gonna look as if there's somebody, they're always gonna approach it as if there's somebody there. That's what they tried to do there, but they were fighting the fire down, they didn't know anybody was up, and
But the city knew.
Yeah.
city had no knowledge.
But somebody was paying the water bill.
There you go.
No, that was,
There you go.
water bill was,
It was a factory in essence. There was somebody that was manufacturing movie theater seats, I believe, or school bus seats, one of the two there.
Refurbishing it, 'cause I rented to him.
Yeah, and there was somebody living in there as well. Now, I will say the fire department was notified immediately when they got there, because I was one of the people standing there, and we made sure they knew, and turns out the person was gone at that time. But,
luckily.
yeah.
But, the water bill had nothing to do with it because it's built to the building, it wasn't built to the apartment.
So I'm going to pose this question to the committee. Here we are an hour into it. We haven't got through page one yet.
That's fine, that's what it's all about.
Do you guys want to continue going through page by page? Do we want to retackle this from a different angle? What are your thoughts? We've heard, a lot of their feedback here.
I will tell you, Mr. Chair, that we do have several versions of a standalone vacant and abandoned building ordinance that I probably haven't touched it in at least 2 years at this point. But there is a standalone version of that floating around out
I'll
there.
say, I think if we're going to look at that again, I want to make sure that we very clearly define what is vacant, what is abandoned. I think our job is to give assurance to the people that we're representing that we're not coming after them, that we're making sure that we're looking out for the safety and the well-being of the community, not being able, having even a tool that could be used to target somebody. I think if we can clearly define and state that, I think we're going to be a lot better off.
So as I read this, and I know everybody else read it, it focuses more on rentals. Is that agreeable to you? So we would like
it's de facto rentals
Right.
because of the reporting issue.
We would like to focus more on abandoned buildings or bank-owned buildings rather than 40% of Bucyrus,
Which is
which
great. I
is
think the
rentals.
first go-around was a major PR problem as far as communication factor of what you were trying to do versus how it came across and perceived from a landlord and property owner perspective.
So, real quick, Bill, and then let me throw this back at you for your opinions. If we scrap this right now, and we stick with the International Property Maintenance Code, we still have an inspector, we still have, your tenants can still report, things. Have we fixed that problem? I don't think so. Is there a fix for that?
Well, Mr. Chair, if it could be heard on that, I think the immediate fix under the code that we currently operate on is to get away from criminal penalties.
So
takes
does
two.
that require us to create legislation, even if it so much as says we follow the International Property Maintenance Code? However, here's how we will penalize?
Yeah, the IPMC sets it up for local penalties, and the city has always had, even before me, always had a criminal penalty process for enforcement of that. And that process is slow. It is out of our control, both from the owner's standpoint and from our standpoint as enforcement, because once a criminal summons is written, it gets sent to the police department for service, and it may get served 3 months later. They may be busy, whatever, it may just not get served right away. And so then an owner who, if there was 10 days to fix a problem, and the owner fixed it on day 12, but the summons was written on day 11, but it didn't get served until 3 months later, the owner's like, what the heck, I fixed this, and we don't necessarily know, because once the property maintenance officer has sent it for summons, he doesn't see it, because then it goes to court, it becomes in my wheelhouse, not his. So getting it out of the criminal court, getting it into the Property Maintenance Appeals Board as an enforcement mechanism, where, it gets brought there, I think that is an immediate action that can be taken, that is much easier to enforce, much easier to provide notice, and much easier for the owners to be heard in a swift environment, or the occupant, whoever it is, in a swift way, rather than through the court process. The court process, a couple of you guys have been through it.
Do you envision that being standalone legislation by itself?
Oh yeah, that's just changing one section in our code. So instead of a property maintenance violation being a first-degree misdemeanor, a property maintenance violation is now a fine of X, and the appeals process for that fine is this, and if it happens again, it's a higher penalty.
Is that something the committee would like to see maybe a draft of with his suggested changes? Yeah.
I think it needs to be geared to everybody, not just, the people that are in the business.
Agreed.
And that goes for your house even too, Mr. Ratliff. If you got gutters falling off your house and it's in disrepair,
And anybody can file those complaints. And I get, landlords perceive that their tenants are going to file complaints. And yeah, but at my house, if, there's an issue, anybody who sees that issue can file that complaint and initiate an investigation as to whether or not there's a violation. And that process is for owner-occupied versus tenant-occupied versus abandoned. It's the same process. Now, interior, yes, more likely. I'm not going to report my interior as a problem.
invite me over.
But if Bruce comes over, sticking forks in all my outlets to make sure if they work or not.
That was not grounded.
Yeah, that may be, that's a possibility. So, I mean, that's why I believe that's probably why, as a landlord, you feel more that it's more geared towards you, but it's really.
Does this sound like a better solution than this?
Yes,
Yeah. Do we agree with that?
yes.
We're gonna have legislation?
I have another question. When I was in one of the Board of Appeals for the property, I don't know, one of them, I don't know. I was in it for both of them, 507 West Marion, 406 West Warren. And the appeals board asked, because when we sat there and had all these conversations, they found out the problems I was having, they asked Rob to stop the criminal, I don't know what the heck you call it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we inquired if that was possible for the
And
city
it
to
was
stop that.
refused.
Yeah.
And of course, Rob said no.
Yeah.
It'll just stop.
Yeah, it's not, once it's initiated, it's one of those things that it's in mine and the judge's control almost completely, which is another reason to get it out of there. So that the city, through that appeals board, which is all citizens for the most part, I think, are you on that?
No.
Okay, so I think the Property Maintenance Appeals Board is all appointed citizens. So it puts it into that. What's that?
That's required.
Yeah, I was just, because I know he's on one, but I couldn't remember which one it was.
BBSA and
Oh, okay.
BZ.
So it's a citizen appeals board. It is exactly what it is, and I think that's what you guys would want. I mean, I think that's, as landlords, and, it'd still be whoever sits in this seat, it's still their job to, prosecute you or persecute you, whatever, way you want to look at it. But you still, then you have that citizen review board, and takes it out of the court.
So you're going to send to this committee and any of these folks that are interested in seeing it, your samples of a standalone piece of legislation that takes things out of the criminal and into civil, and then also a standalone segment of vacant property repair and registration and so on and so forth.
Yeah, the vacant abandoned one's already done. I'll send that to you. Probably should read through it and just make sure things haven't changed.
And then,
But the appeals, the civil stuff, yeah,
and then to those of you that I'm going to assume will read through it as closely as we will, I'm going to ask the same thing. I'd like to sit back down and do this again, take another stab at it, and maybe we'll get to page 2 next time. But where we can get your input as well, because as I stated at the start of this meeting, our goal is never to try to just rush something through to have something. It's to have something purposeful that's going to benefit everybody, that's going to be for the good of the community. Bruce Truca.
So vacant, is it vacant when you have all the utilities on?
I think that's going to be up to us to decide what vacant truly
I was
is.
gonna say, you got electric, you got gas, and you got water.
As long as your water bill's getting paid, right? The city's happy.
And it might be vacant, but it's got all the utilities.
I think that'll be up to us to decide what that.
The electric company and the gas company and the city is collecting.
But if you're paying utilities and all the windows are busted out and the doors are open.
Well, then the other half of it is it's supposed to be safe and secure.
Right,
So it's probably going to be this and this and this and this.
Yeah.
It has to equate to being non-vacant.
Another thing I'd like to pose, and it goes back to occupant and owner, is there any way as landlord, and it goes back to what you said, damn if you do, damn if you don't, cleaning up like outside of the buildings that an occupant has been the one that put it out there. I mean, to evict somebody is not just it is not an easy thing to do either. So the only recourse I have is to just go and pick it up. And I know you guys like it because I'm the one with the skin in the game to go pick it up. But is there any way we can do something with occupants? Not just the owners, with occupants?
Yes, yeah, and I understand the ongoing problem there. One of the issues is we don't always know who the occupant is. And the easiest way is when a property maintenance citation goes out, it goes out to the registered address on the tax card. So if you receive that and respond immediately and say, hey, I'm the owner, but I have a tenant, this is the tenant's name, I can assure you that Gordon would send that new notice to the tenant.
But whose job is then who's going to pay the fine if it doesn't get done then?
Well, at that point in time, it could go against the occupant if we know. And one of the things that has to be defined very well, and I know owner and occupant, it just seems very clear, but it's not. Because there's all these nebulous entities that are in custody or control. And when you look at, not to get back to page 1, but when you look at 104D, we can get bogged down in what is an occupant, what is an operator, what is an owner.
Yeah.
But D is trying to encompass all of that. And that is one of the key things is being able to define person in custody or control. And one of the things that the city of Cincinnati, I went and met with their law director. One of the things that they had a tremendous amount of success with, and we didn't go that far in this, was they defined it as person in custody or control. Mm-hmm. So they would have, Bank A owned this property, and Bank A would have a manager, some low-level bureaucratic manager in the system, who was the person in custody and control over that property. The city of Cincinnati was filing criminal charges against that person, who's just an employee at the bank, when things weren't getting done right. And they had tremendous success. We didn't go that far. One, because I don't know that would fly in our court. I mean, they have environmental courts and things like that in the bigger counties. And two, we don't have the tools and the manpower to be charging poor little person that just got their first job out of college at a bank that's in Oklahoma, or wherever they're based out of. So those were issues that we didn't go that far, but that's an issue in defining owner and occupant. There's there's a whole bunch of gray in between there. It doesn't seem like there should be.
One of the issues that I see a lot of times when a notice of violation is appealed is that the appellant comes and they complain about receiving the violation notice, and they haven't really done anything to address the issue up to that point. They haven't contacted the law director's office and tried to arrange for time to remedy the problem. They wait until the last minute and then they file an appeal. If they would just take the time when they get the violation to contact Gordon Grove or Rob Ratliff, law director's office, and try to work out a solution to the problem at that point, a lot of these violations that come to the board would never be. They would be taken care of. Rob's office, I know a lot of times, works with people and grants them time to take care of the issues.
And we're getting better at it. We're getting better at it too. And you know, some growing pains. I mean, we really started enforcing these. I mean, it sounds like a long time ago now, but about 5 years ago, we really started being stringent with some of the enforcement. And certainly in the first couple of years, Ken and I came to blows a couple of times, I'm sure. There were some growing pains in figuring out how to adjust that and how to do that back and forth, and how to avoid scope creep. I think Ken would agree that was an issue early on. So we're trying to get away from that and trying to be more focused. And it's an ongoing issue. I mean, in the 200 years of the history, we've really been working on this diligently for the last 5, and that's not, not all that long.
Now, would that not have to be listed in a lease for the tenant to be responsible to keep the outside of the property up to code?
One of the questions that I had in here was when it said on page 2, we almost got there tonight, where on the first paragraph of it says, who's got the responsibility. My note says, it's going to fall on the owner unless it's specified in a lease. That was my question. So I think that's something, whether we define that or whether landlords have to take that extra step to try to define it. I don't know what the right answer to that is, but I think you're absolutely right that, like you said, if the weeds on your property are out of control, they're coming after you. Even though your agreement with the person, maybe they're taking care of the lawn, they're coming looking for you. And until said time, you at least notify them, hey, Joe Smith lives here, you need to go talk to him, type of a thing. Gary?
To answer your question, I called Rob because I got a call from Kirk Fankhauser that Monday night of the one appeal that I had made. And I talked to Rob, and I told him, I said, I'm on my way to Maine. I will address it and get it cleaned up when I get back. Before I got back, I had a summons to go to criminal court.
And again, that's the issue with that criminal court, because that summons goes in a different path, and we don't, it can get done it can get done on one day, but then it's down there waiting for them to get served, and that can drag out. I've wreaked enough havoc here. I do have someplace I have to be at 7:30, so if I can run away.
I was gonna say, that was one of the things I was looking at. I mean, I know everyone's like a standalone, but at the same time, that's picking at one person.
That's
Now
right.
you're gonna hear the same way everybody is here. Everybody thinks that they're getting picked at. We do need a property maintenance that's more localized, because some of the things in that property maintenance that we're following does not fit well with our community. It doesn't. And if we go by those rules, there's things that we're all getting hit for. I don't care how nice your place is, they're gonna find something, they can easily find something in there. But my thing is if somebody makes a complaint, one of the things that we should have added is if there's a complaint made about a property, everybody in the neighborhood gets a notice stating a complaint was made about a property, the neighborhood is being checked out. That way you don't have his house got complained about by his tenant who didn't want to pay the rent, or by the guy across the street who can't stand him, whose house is falling apart. you know, his house could be 10 times better than the one across the street that's complaining. And we've seen it time and time again. And I can honestly sit here and say, it is not just landlords.
I think to some extent that happens.
Where I am, you have people complaining about their neighbors.
Yeah, I was in the office one day when Gordon Grove brought in a complaint, and I overheard him, telling Landon that, well, I was out to look at this property, but I turned around and saw this property, so that I know that does happen now.
Well, it does now.
Yeah, Ken?
Rob left the room, but when he mentioned about 5 years ago, when they really got on this,
Yeah.
and I was like a poster child for being
He was.
the target.
Not the only one, though.
When I first got my notice, the very first thing I did was call Gordon Groves.
That
And it was 10,
first 300 properties that were hit with ours
Yeah.
5 years ago.
Yeah, he was in there a couple of times.
I'm not sure about the 300, but I know about one, mine.
I was one of that 300 also.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay?
All right. Anyway, you made a comment about, try to talk to Rob or to Gordon Groves on it. All right, so I get my notice, I got 10 days to literally do 2 months worth of work, okay? Based on the weather, it was January, it couldn't have been any worse.
Right.
Okay, so the first thing I do, I call Gordon, hey, blah, 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 and we met, and he said, I can't give you any more time. I don't have the ability to give you more time. Now, that's changed since then, because when I go to these appeal board meetings, he says, oh yeah, I'll give you more time, just work it out, communicate and all this. At that time, that wasn't the case though. And so I got sort of caught up in that, and that's why we didn't have to go to appeal, and we ended up going to court, because of that. But so it's changed for the better. So I wish Rob was here because I want to give him some good information rather than always hearing he's always the bad guy. It's not, but it's better. But
As Rob said,
it was definitely a bumpy road 5 years ago.
So just to reiterate, we're gonna put this on the very back burner. Rob is gonna work on getting us copies, and like I said, we'll get it out to you guys as well, of some standalone legislation for true vacant properties, which we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna read through it with our questions. We're gonna come back here and go through it page by page. We're gonna clearly define what each of these things are, and then he's gonna also give us an example of changing the criminal penalties to civil penalties. So I think that's about all we can do tonight.
I have one other question.
I'm going to let you guys have your closing statements, but I want to kind of wrap this up. Otherwise, we're going to sit here all night long and tell stories, and that's not helping us get anywhere. So that's the plan going forward. We as a committee are going to look at these things that Rob's going to send us. I'm going to ask for you guys to look at them as well. We're going to gather back here. I plan on calling another meeting aside from all the other joint committee meetings so that we can devote a night to doing this and hearing what your input is. So with that, I'm going to ask if there's any public participation, give you each a chance to say your parting words. Ken?
The one thing that hasn't been addressed, I guess formally, was the inspector, the PMO, his qualifications, his certifications, his continuing education, his whatever. I mean, yeah, we can hire a retired fire guy all day long. Does that make him qualified to go out and look at our homes though? And it's sort of addressed in the international code. It's obviously not addressed in the new one, which I don't think will be any issue anyway. But that's going to be an issue. And so if we're going to have a joint meeting, we might as well throw that on the agenda also, because it's, at some point we're being judged, and by who? So.
A lot of my notes in here refer to that.
And then the other comment I have is probably the most important. I really appreciate the openness of the city to have us come in here and air this stuff, and we're all acting like adults and try to make things better. And I really appreciate that fresh air approach.
Thanks. I tell you, none of us are experts on this. We all think we are, maybe. But at the end of the day, none of us are experts on this, and you're going to get a hell of a lot more done if we're all putting our heads together. And you may have an idea that I haven't thought of, and hearing your fresh look on something is what we need to do. So that's why we're doing that. Gary, I think you had your hand up.
Yes. The guy on West Warren Street, he's cleaned up the stuff he scraps. He keeps it on his truck and his trailer. He still has stuff in the driveway. Not everybody keeps everything picked up. That's just the way it is. You can go different parts of town and see the same thing. It's just the way they live. you gotta give them some leeway. I mean,
That all depends on-
it's not the Taj Mahal.
That all depends on what kind of items it is that's sitting
Understand
out too.
that.
You know, I mean, you can't have refrigerators and stoves
No.
and so forth sitting
The
out
scrap
there.
stuff is going on
Yeah.
this truck and trailer.
Scrap
If you have-
tires that are
but
holding
at the
water,
same
yeah,
time-
there's certain things in there you just
But at the
can't.
same time, the house you're talking about across the street from me that burned out, he's the one that was mowing the grass on there to keep the neighborhood nice. Nobody ever said anything, thank you to him.
So he's not getting any credit for what he does do.
Right, exactly.
Aaron?
I say, I was just gonna suggest maybe everybody that's looked through this, look through the stuff that they're gonna get and maybe email or send a letter to the committee
I was getting to that.
as to what you think would be a good addition or a change or something, you know, that way we're all working together.
But you have to come back to the meeting.
Yeah. I'll take it a step further, you know, as you read through this, if there's things you thought were decent in this, or things you thought were absolutely horrible, I think still letting us know that, which kind of what I was hoping to get done tonight. Share that, send all of us an email, because I think there's still gonna be some issues out there that the International Property Maintenance Code isn't gonna tackle, that we might be able to tackle better. I don't think this is completely dead yet, I just think that's not what we wanna work on right now. I think we got, you know, bigger fish to fry and a better way to fry them, so, Rebecca.
Before you all leave, can you write down name, address, and phone number? And
An
that way
email
I can
address if
also-
you have one.
An email address, and I can also send you this stuff so you don't have to drive up and get it or anything like that.
And any of you that don't have any of our phone numbers or email addresses that you want them, I know several of you have mine, but if you want them, make sure you get them before you go. Anybody else have any questions or
I got
comments?
one. I guess my mind was changed a little bit. I agree, you know, the international code might not be the thing to do. I mean, maybe do something more local, but it's gotta be clearly defined. That's all I care about. And that's what I know you had a bunch, and they got stopped and all got, you know, shot up, but, I mean,
I wasted all this colored paper.
hopefully it was the city's expense, it wasn't.
No, it was all mine, but. Joe, you have something?
Yeah, I mean, that's the big thing, I guess, is the clearly defined, and there's a line in the sand at some point, because how deep do you want to get and how much certification do you want that person that's inspecting to have? So it's that clearly defined line that I think helps everybody involved.
Agreed, Bill.
Yeah. The new proposed property maintenance code, I think it's really a twofold item here. One is to address the vacant properties, and the other is to basically slim down the International Property Maintenance Code, make it more understandable for the property owners and residents, regardless of if you're a renter or the property owner.
I think we're all happy to hear all of your comments and suggestions, you know, as you read through the international version, as you read through this.
I do have one question.
While we're here.
Do you guys think commercial properties and residential properties should be separate? Or should we put them together?
Do you want to have a separate code
Are you talking for vacancy or for?
Or vacancy,
for vacancies?
commercial versus residential?
I think
Probably
I
should.
think-
you're gonna have to, are you? I mean, when you think of a commercial real estate factor and of how long it may sit.
I think it could be in the same code, but it has to have its own chapters.
Clearly
I think it has to
Clearly
be,
defined.
they have to be, you know, looked at one different from the other. I think we'd be foolish to think that they would be the same.
One other comment is I think the city needs to work with us more.
We're trying.
Because my comment about Rob, that I called him and told him I'd get it cleaned up. And it's like they're a bunch of Gestapo.
Yeah.
They're not working with us. We're trying to work with them, but it goes two ways.
Well, and they're working right now, and this isn't an excuse, but they're working right now within the laws that are on the books. I think what we're trying to do is to make some laws that are a little bit more fair.
I think
that-
from the,
that
going
give
from the
you just as
criminal to
much say
civil
and
is gonna
chance as
help
we
out
do.
massively,
Yeah.
because I know on a criminal end, your hands end up tied. As soon as that
Yeah.
Second I go
summons is
then-
filed, you're
toast.
Not
toast
to
until
court.
you sit in front of the
Yeah.
judge.
The whole idea is to solve the problem, not to
Right.
put anybody in jail, not to fine
Exactly.
anybody,
Yeah.
to solve the problems.
And
I agree.
if you guys believe it or not, I was up there with the eviction on this one on West Mary. The magistrate specifically asked me, and I had a guy at one of the appeals meetings said he didn't believe me. But I'm telling you, that magistrate asked me, why are you evicting him? I said, because of money. If you'd have given any other answer, he would not have evicted him. That's what they're doing.
I think that's what the board member was referring to when he didn't believe you, was the fact that if you gave any other reason, that he would not have granted the eviction.
No, he won't.
Well,
I know too many cases of it.
Rent. It's-
Pardon?
It's non-payment of rent. If you're evicting somebody, never accept rent, ever.
Right.
Rebecca.
No, never mind. Oh, I got it. So what would happen in situations, if you separate that commercial versus residential, what about some of these commercial or businesses that have apartments above them?
I think that's all
That's
for
where
us to
that
define
non-sheriff
as we
is
go forward and work on it.
But that is where it is defined,
Yeah, what is your building? Your building downtown?
Upstairs, according to Richland County, upstairs is considered residential. It's been grandfathered, even though it sat vacant upstairs for
Many years.
40-some years. It was still considered residential
Yeah.
because it never had a change of use upstairs.
Right.
Once you have that change of use, you're stuck with what the last change of use was.
Right.
So.
Because it's a little different than zoning, we're not talking how your building was zoned, we're talking about what its intended use was.
According to Richland County, I'm residential upstairs. I had a residential alteration upstairs
I had.
in a commercial building. So that's where my inspections were, all my sanitary is inspected by Richland County Health Department because Crawford County only handles septic and wells. So Richland County had to come inspect everything. Richland County had to come inspect because it is still in a commercial building, but I'm residential, but I fall underneath a residential code versus all that. So that's where I'm saying we're potentially opening up a massive can of worms depending on how far we want to go.
so are you saying that your upstairs residential section was still occupied as a residence? Or
The last use,
classified?
the last use and occupancy was residential, so it stays residential according to Ohio Revised Code in Richland County.
Well,
And they do
but
not
that's only
inspect.
if it is used as residential within a 2-year period.
No, you're talking zoning now, it's a
You're
whole
talking
different,
zoning. It's a whole nother
Yeah,
avenue.
that's for
Okay,
zoning.
but
It's
still,
Because he's in the downtown business district.
Right.
Yeah.
Which allows for, according to zoning, allows for residents upstairs.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
All right, so anybody else in public, last chance? All right, Jimmy?
I hope you all come to the next meeting. Bring friends.
I tried to call everybody I knew. I think more than landlords need to be here. And I tried to get some to come in, but no one showed
They
up.
don't think that we're gonna work with them, I believe, and. we're
That's
trying.
what it's been.
We're trying to show you that.
I know.
Bruce Drucka?
I would rather see you guys come, because I learned more from you guys being here than anybody sending me an email. Yeah, I can't talk back to you, I'd rather
Right.
see you right here in the room.
Marcus Keever?
We need to communicate like this. That's the best way to get the information across. Otherwise, we're only gonna see what we see.
Right.
And that's what happens with most of our legislation. People complain after we do it, but they don't come to give us any feedback.
Well, I
And this is
appreciate,
great.
I
What's
appreciate
that?
We need those.
going back and forth. I really do. I think everybody here does.
No, if we don't need to request any legislation. If we had told him specifically we wanted to say this, this, and this, we would request draft legislation. But in this instance, we just asked him to give us more samples so that we can continue this conversation.
Okay, how soon can we continue this conversation?
As soon as he gives us these things, we'll schedule another meeting. So as soon as we get those pieces from Rob, we will schedule another meeting. Rebecca's gonna make sure she has all your contact information, and we'll go from there.
All right.
All right, I am going to adjourn the Special Health and Safety Committee meeting at 7:39 PM. Thank you, everybody.
Oh, yeah.